The clinking of crystal glasses at the Sapphire Lounge sounded like a celebration, but to Daniel, it felt like a countdown. His wife, Evelyn, radiant in her new role as vice president, was the center of the room. Yet, when Daniel found his name card, it wasn't at the head table. He was banished to the far corner, nestled between two 20-something interns. A chilling realization crept down his spine as he caught Evelyn sharing a lingering, secret smile with her CEO. Welcome to another story of hidden truths. Subscribe to uncover the secrets behind closed doors. The chandelier at the Sapphire Lounge cast a fractured, golden light across the room, illuminating the pinnacle of Evelyn Brooks's career. It was a night of triumph, a lavish dinner celebrating her elevation to vice president of Ashford Media Group. Daniel Foster stood near the entrance, adjusting his tie, a quiet swell of pride warming his chest. He had been the anchor during her late nights, the silent support system behind her ruthless corporate ascent for the past 7 years. Tonight was supposed to be their shared victory. The maitre d' offered a polite, practiced smile, gesturing toward the elegant seating chart displayed on a silver easel. Daniel scanned the calligraphed names, his eyes naturally gravitating toward the head table. He saw Evelyn's name, perfectly centered. Beside it was Chad Hunter, the charismatic, aggressively ambitious CEO of Ashford Media. But Daniel's name was notably absent from the VIP section. A slight frown creased his forehead. He traced his finger down the list, past the senior partners, past the major clients, until he reached table number 12. It was situated in the far corner of the dining room, practically brushing against the swinging doors of the kitchen. Daniel Foster. He was flanked by Nicole Davis and Mark Stevens, names he vaguely recognized from Evelyn's irritated complaints about the new batch of summer interns. A cold, heavy stone dropped in his stomach. This wasn't an administrative oversight. In Evelyn's world, every detail was meticulously curated, every seating arrangement a calculated statement of hierarchy, influence, and power. Seating her husband with the interns wasn't a mistake. It was a loud, deliberate message broadcasted to the entire firm. It was a social demotion in the most public arena possible. Taking a steadying breath, Daniel navigated through the sea of tailored Armani suits and trailing designer gowns. The air was thick with the scent of expensive perfume and roasted duck. He reached table 12, pulling out his chair just as the room erupted into polite applause. Evelyn was making her entrance. She looked breathtaking in a sleek, emerald green gown, her posture radiating an untouchable, almost predatory confidence. Daniel watched her glide across the floor, waiting for her eyes to seek him out, to share a private look of complicity or apology. Instead, her gaze bypassed the dimly lit corners entirely, locking onto Chad Hunter. As she took her seat at the head table, Chad leaned in, his hand resting on the small of her back for a fraction of a second too long. It was a proprietary touch, an intimate gesture that belonged behind closed doors, not in the middle of a corporate gala. Daniel sat in the shadows, the clatter of silverware from the nearby kitchen mocking his isolation. His phone vibrated in his pocket. It was a shared calendar notification, synced from Evelyn's iPad at home. * weekend retreat, the Meridian. * but earlier that week, she had told him she was attending a mandatory women's leadership summit in Boston. The screen glowed harshly in the dim light, a tiny, glaring crack in the perfect facade of their marriage. The notification on his screen faded to black, leaving Daniel staring at his own reflection in the darkened glass. * the Meridian. * a luxury hotel just 10 blocks away, not a convention center in Boston. He slipped the phone back into his tailored jacket, the device now feeling like a lead weight pressing against his ribs. So, Mr. Foster, a tentative voice broke through his racing thoughts. It was Nicole Davis, the marketing intern seated to his left. She was clutching her water goblet like a lifeline, her eyes darting nervously toward the head table. Is it normal for spouses to sit back here? I mean, congratulations to your wife, of course. She's an absolute legend to us in the bullpens. Daniel forced a tight, polite smile, masking the raw sting of the question. Evelyn wanted the focus to be on the team tonight, Nicole, building morale from the ground up. It was a practiced lie, smooth and hollow, tasting like ash on his tongue. Across the expansive dining room, a burst of laughter erupted from the VIP section. Evelyn's laugh. It was that bright, melodic sound she used exclusively for high-stakes clients and executives, a sound entirely absent from their quiet apartment for months. Daniel watched as Chad Hunter leaned close to her, murmuring something near her ear. Evelyn didn't pull back. Instead, she tilted her head, allowing the professional boundary between them to vanish. She picked up her champagne flute, and as she took a sip, her eyes locked with Chad's over the crystal rim. It was a look of shared, intoxicating power. A memory surfaced unbidden, sharp and stinging. 2 months ago, Evelyn had moved her things into the guest room, citing the unbearable stress of the vice president evaluation period. Asterisk, I just need to breathe, Dan. I need total focus if we are going to secure our future. It's nothing personal, it's just business. Asterisk, he had swallowed his loneliness, making her black coffee every morning, managing the household, becoming a ghost in his own marriage so she could shine on stages like this. He had believed her. She and Mr. Hunter have such a fierce dynamic. Mark Stevens, the other intern, chimed in around a mouthful of artisan bread. He was completely oblivious to the tension radiating from the man beside him. People in the office say they operate like one mind. He handpicked her for this role, you know. Skipped right over 3 senior directors. Did he? Daniel murmured, his gaze fixed on the head table like a man staring into a blinding sun. Chad reached out to refill Evelyn's glass with vintage Bollinger, his forearm brushing deliberately against hers. For a fraction of a second, Evelyn's hand dropped to rest lightly over Chad's wrist. A subtle, anchoring touch. It wasn't the touch of a subordinate to a boss. It was the casual, effortless intimacy of lovers. The air in the room suddenly felt too thin, thickened by the cloying scent of roasted duck and impending suffocation. The invisible tether that had bound Daniel to Evelyn for 7 years was fraying rapidly, snapping thread by thread under the chandelier's unforgiving light. "Excuse me," Daniel said abruptly, his chair scraping harshly against the hardwood floor. He didn't wait for the interns to reply. He needed oxygen, and more importantly, he needed to escape the humiliating spectacle of his own irrelevance. He turned his back on the glowing head table and walked briskly toward the shadowed, quiet hallway leading to the restrooms. The heavy oak door of the restroom closed behind Daniel, abruptly cutting off the symphony of clinking silverware and ambient jazz. The sudden silence in the marble-lined corridor was deafening. He leaned over the polished granite sink, gripping the edges until his knuckles turned bone white. Turning on the brass faucet, he let the icy water run over his wrists, staring at his pale, strained reflection in the mirror. He was searching for the man Evelyn used to look at with admiration, but all he saw was a tired ghost wearing a tailored suit that suddenly felt 2 sizes too big. He closed his eyes, desperately trying to rationalize the seating arrangement, the lingering touches, the shared calendar notification. Asterisk, maybe it is just a digital glitch. Maybe she really is going to Boston, and the assistant messed up the itinerary. Asterisk, it was the pathetic bargaining of a man watching his life crumble, clinging to the smallest slivers of doubt. The heavy thud of the outer door swinging open shattered his fragile rationalization. Heavy, confident footsteps echoed against the pristine tiles. Daniel instinctively stepped back, retreating into the shadowed alcove near the linen towels just as Chad Hunter strode into the room, his phone pressed aggressively against his ear. "No. Push the Monday briefing to Tuesday," Chad commanded, his voice echoing off the cold marble. He loosened his silk tie, entirely unaware of his hidden audience. "I do not care what the board says. I will be completely off the grid this weekend." A brief pause followed, filled only by the muffled, tinny voice on the other end of the line. Daniel held his breath, his chest tight, a sickening knot forming in his stomach. Chad chuckled, a low, arrogant sound that made Daniel's blood run cold. "Yes," she told him the Boston Summit story. "It is handled. We check into the Meridian's penthouse on Friday at 6. Make sure the concierge has the vintage Bollinger waiting in the suite. Evelyn developed a real taste for it tonight. The words hung in the sterile air, heavy and absolute. Asterisk the Boston Summit story. Asterisk the invisible tether connecting Daniel to his 7-year marriage did not just snap. It was violently incinerated. The notification on his phone had not been a glitch. It was an itinerary for infidelity. Daniel's instinct screamed at him to step out of the shadows, to grab the CEO by his custom-tailored lapels and shatter the smug expression on his face. His muscles coiled, adrenaline flooding his veins. But a cold, calculating logic clamped down on his burning rage. Confronting Chad here, man-to-man, would only make him the erratic, jealous husband ruining an executive's perfect corporate coronation. It would hand Evelyn the perfect excuse to play the victim. Right? See you Tuesday, Chad finished, ending the call. He ran a hand through his perfectly styled hair in the mirror, adjusted his platinum cufflinks, and walked out, leaving the sharp scent of expensive cedarwood cologne lingering in his wake. Daniel stepped out from the alcove, his breathing shallow and jagged. The choice was made. He would not be the unhinged spouse creating a boardroom scandal in a restroom. He was going to find his wife, look her straight in the eye, and see exactly how effortlessly she could lie to his face. The hallway outside the restrooms was a stark contrast to the lively dining room, dim and soundproofed by thick crimson velvet curtains. Daniel leaned against the velvet, his heart hammering a violent rhythm against his ribs. He didn't have to wait long. Evelyn emerged from the private dining area, moving with the practiced elegance of a woman who owned the room she had just left. Her emerald gown caught the low light, but her smile vanished the instant she saw him standing there, rigid and pale. "Daniel," she said, her voice dropping to a sharp, annoyed whisper. "What are you doing lurking out here? People are noticing you're gone from the interns' table." "Are they?" he replied, the words tasting like copper in his mouth. "Or are they just glad the embarrassing distraction is out of sight so they can focus on you and Chad?" Evelyn's eyes narrowed, the warmth draining from her perfectly contoured face. "Don't start this tonight. It's my promotion dinner. I worked 7 years for this moment. I will not let your insecurity ruin it." "My insecurity," Daniel repeated, stepping closer, invading the pristine aura she projected. "Is that what you call being seated with kids half my age while my wife plays footsie with the CEO in front of the entire firm?" She crossed her arms, a defensive barricade. "It's optics, Daniel. Chad needed me beside him to show unified leadership. Seating you at the head table would have looked provincial, like I need my husband holding my hand. This is the big leagues. You have to understand the game." "The game," he echoed softly, staring into the familiar hazel eyes that suddenly looked like a stranger's. He wanted to scream the truth at her, to hurl the overheard conversation and the shared calendar notification like weapons, but a cold, sickening curiosity held him back. He needed to see how deep the rot went. "And what about this weekend, Evelyn? The Boston Summit. Is that part of the game too?" For a fraction of a second, the muscles in her jaw tightened, a microscopic crack in her flawless composure. But she recovered instantly, her voice smooth and unyielding. "Yes, it's a critical networking event. I'm leaving Friday at 6. Why are you suddenly interrogating my schedule?" "Just wondering," he said, his voice dropping to a lethal calm. "Just wondering if they serve vintage Bollinger at women's leadership summits." Evelyn stared at him, the silence stretching taut between them. The velvet curtains seemed to absorb the tension, suffocating the air around them. She didn't flinch, didn't blink, didn't offer a flustered denial. She merely adjusted her diamond earrings, her expression hardening into something resembling contempt. "You're being paranoid," she stated flatly, turning on her heel. "I'm going back to my table. Try to act like you belong here, or just go home." She walked away, the emerald silk trailing behind her like a poisonous stain, leaving Daniel standing alone in the quiet corridor, clutching the ashes of his 7-year marriage. The chilling realization settled deep in his bones. Evelyn wasn't just lying. She simply didn't care enough to hide it well anymore. Daniel forced his legs to move, navigating the maze of linen-draped tables back to his designated exile at table 12. The journey felt infinitely longer than his initial arrival. The air was thick with the scent of rich reduction sauces and the hum of forced corporate joviality. He sank back into his chair, a stark contrast to the lively chatter resuming around him. The interns had moved on from debating office politics to dissecting the fashion choices of the senior partners. I mean, the tailoring on that emerald gown is just aggressive, Nicole Davis, the marketing intern, whispered loudly over her half-eaten dessert, oblivious to Daniel's pale, rigid posture. It screams power move. It's not just the dress, Mark Stevens interjected, leaning in closer, his voice dropping to a conspiratorial hush. Did you see the watch she's wearing? It's completely understated, but it's a vintage piece. I was looking closely when she was talking to Chad earlier. Daniel's head snapped up, the dull ache in his chest instantly sharpening into a jagged, agonizing spike. Asterisk a vintage watch? Asterisk Evelyn had never been one for vintage jewelry. Her tastes were notoriously modern, defined by sleek lines and brand new, recognizable labels. He had bought her a slender, diamond-encrusted Cartier tank for their 5th anniversary, a piece she practically lived in. He hadn't noticed what she was wearing tonight in the blur of the evening's humiliations. What watch? Daniel asked, his voice sounding hollow and detached, as if belonging to someone else. The sudden intensity in his tone startled the interns, their gossiping instantly faltering. Nicole blinked, her cheeks flushing slightly as she realized she had been dissecting the vice president in front of her husband. Oh, Mr. Foster. It's just a beautiful piece. Very classic. A thin gold band. Looks like a Patek Philippe from the 70s. Yeah, Mark added, eager to smooth over the awkwardness. It's super subtle, but anyone who knows watches can spot it. It's exactly the kind of thing Chad Hunter collects. He's always showing off his vintage finds in the break room. The words hit Daniel like a physical blow, stealing the air from his lungs. A vintage Patek Philippe. The Cartier he had saved 6 months of his salary for was sitting forgotten in a velvet box on her dresser, replaced by a subtle gift from the man she was currently laughing with at the head table. The watch wasn't an accessory. It was a brand, a silent claim Chad had placed on her wrist for the entire firm to see. Daniel's eyes found Evelyn across the room. She was raising a glass, the sleeve of her gown falling back to reveal the slender gold band glinting under the chandelier. It was a physical manifestation of her betrayal, a constant, ticking reminder strapped directly to her pulse. She must have treated herself for the promotion, Nicole offered gently, totally misreading the devastating silence radiating from Daniel. Yeah, Daniel managed to whisper, his fingers instinctively reaching into his pocket, tracing the smooth, familiar curve of his own wedding band. She definitely treated herself. The clinking of silverware and the low hum of conversation faded into a dull roar in Daniel's ears, replaced by the deafening sound of an invisible clock ticking down the final seconds of his marriage. The dinner smoothly transitioned into the networking phase. Waiters swiftly cleared the dessert plates as the room's energy shifted from formal dining to a buzzing corporate mixer. Evelyn finally descended from her throne at the head table, shadowed by the company's official photographer. She was making her calculated rounds, performing the role of the gracious, approachable new executive. When she approached table 12, the interns instantly sat up straighter, visibly awestruck by her proximity. Nicole, Mark, I am so thrilled you both are here, Evelyn said, her voice dripping with a practiced, magazine-ready warmth. She turned to Daniel, casually handing him her heavy, emerald-encrusted clutch. Darling, be a lifesaver. Grab my Tom Ford lipstick? I need a quick touch-up before Chad's toast. Before Daniel could respond, the photographer efficiently corralled Evelyn and the 2 interns into a tight frame, barking instructions about lighting and posture. Daniel was entirely forgotten, relegated to the role of a silent assistant standing just outside the camera's flash. He looked down at the velvet bag in his hands. The gold clasp snapped open with a quiet, expensive click. Inside, meticulously arranged, were the tools of her flawless facade, a silver mirror compact, the requested lipstick, and her phone. But wedged tightly between the emerald silk lining and her leather card holder was a foreign object. A sleek, matte black magnetic card. Daniel's thumb grazed the cool plastic. He slid it upward just enough to catch the embossed gold lettering catching the ambient light. The Meridian Penthouse Access. His breath hitched, a jagged intake of air that scraped against his tight throat. The overheard restroom conversation echoed relentlessly in his mind. There was no mandatory Boston summit. It was a fully orchestrated, unapologetic weekend of infidelity, arranged behind his back while he ironed her suits and cooked her dinners. But as he moved to push the hotel key back into the shadows, his finger brushed against a small, heavy piece of cardstock folded beneath it. Driven by a morbid, masochistic need to see the absolute bottom of the abyss, Daniel pulled it out. It was a handwritten note on Ashford Media Group's premium stationery. Asterisk, you secured this VP spot the day you signed that marriage certificate. The best PR optic we ever engineered. See you at the penthouse. See. The elegant cursive blurred as a freezing, paralyzing numbness washed over Daniel's entire body. Asterisk, the day you signed that marriage certificate. Asterisk, the implication struck him with the force of a physical blow. His marriage had not slowly decayed into a failure. It had been a calculated fraud from its inception. A strategic alliance to make a ruthlessly ambitious, single woman appear stable and traditionally grounded to Ashford's conservative board of directors. He was never a husband. He was a corporate prop. Daniel. Evelyn's voice sliced through the high-pitched ringing in his ears. She was holding her hand out expectantly, her vintage Patek Philippe gleaming on her wrist, as the camera flashed one more blinding time. The lipstick? Daniel's fingers closed over the sleek, black tube of Tom Ford lipstick, the gold-embossed room key, and the damning note sliding back into the emerald clutch's dark interior with a quiet, sickening finality. He handed the bag back to Evelyn, his face a carefully constructed mask of polite indifference. The camera flashed one last time, capturing the very moment Daniel Foster ceased to be a husband and became a spectator to his own life's demolition. "Thank you, darling," Evelyn murmured, her tone dismissive as she snatched the bag, her eyes already scanning the room for her next strategic interaction. She didn't notice the profound, hollow stillness in his eyes, nor the slight tremor in his hand as he retreated to the shadows of table 12. The soft clinking of a spoon against a crystal microphone cut through the ambient hum of the Sapphire Lounge. The room instantly hushed, all attention snapping to the center stage where Chad Hunter stood, radiating effortless authority. The spotlight caught the subtle gleam of his platinum cufflinks and the satisfied, proprietary smirk playing on his lips. Evelyn materialized at his side, her posture perfect, her face illuminated by the bright, artificial glow of success. "Ladies and gentlemen," Chad began, his voice a rich, commanding baritone that easily commanded the room's respect. "Tonight, we are not just celebrating a promotion. We are celebrating the realization of a vision." He paused, letting the silence stretch, commanding the room's undivided attention. His eyes drifted over the crowd, landing briefly on the VIP tables before shifting, almost imperceptibly, toward the back corner where Daniel sat paralyzed. "When Evelyn Brooks joined Ashford Media 7 years ago, I saw something rare," Chad continued, turning slightly to face her. "I saw a raw, unfiltered ambition that needed grounding, a focus that required the right environment to truly thrive. She understood that in our industry, perception is just as critical as performance. The board needed to see stability, a commitment to the long game, and a solid foundation. Every word was a carefully coded message, a public victory lap disguised as a corporate eulogy for Daniel's life." The interns beside him leaned forward, engrossed in the CEO's charismatic speech, completely oblivious to the man beside them silently suffocating under the weight of the revelation. Evelyn made the necessary strategic choices to build that foundation, Chad said, his voice dropping an octave, taking on an intimate, almost conspiratorial tone. He raised his glass of vintage Bollinger, the amber liquid catching the light. "She established the perfect narrative. And because of her impeccable execution of that strategy, She stands before you tonight as our new vice president." A roar of applause erupted from the floor, drowning out the erratic, frantic beating of Daniel's heart. He stared at Evelyn, watching her accept the adulation with a radiant, practiced smile. She raised her own glass, her eyes locking with Chad's over the rim, the vintage Patek Philippe flashing on her wrist, a silent, arrogant confirmation of the entire charade. Daniel finally understood the magnitude of the betrayal. It wasn't just a physical affair. It was the theft of his youth, his trust, and his very identity. He hadn't been a partner in building her dream. He had been the raw material she used to construct her own pedestal. The 7 years of shared dinners, quiet nights, and supposed sacrifices were nothing more than a meticulously crafted public relations campaign designed to appease a conservative board of directors. He was the solid foundation, the stability, the perfect narrative. He was the optic. The applause continued to thunder around him, a mocking soundtrack to his complete erasure. Daniel looked down at his own hand, at the simple gold band he had worn with quiet pride for 7 years. It suddenly felt incredibly heavy, a shackle forged in deceit. He didn't feel anger anymore. The searing rage had burned out, leaving behind a cold, desolate clarity. The contract was fulfilled. The promotion was secured. His role in Evelyn Brooks's carefully curated life was officially obsolete. The applause slowly ebbed, replaced by the polite, animated hum of a room satisfied with its own collective success. Chad stepped down from the microphone, his hand resting lightly, possessively, on the small of Evelyn's back. The gesture was no longer a suspicion. It was a loud, undeniable confirmation of the contract she had signed away her soul, and his, to fulfill. Daniel remained rooted in his chair at table 12, the interns beside him already diving back into their superficial analysis of the speech. He stared at his left hand resting on the white linen tablecloth. The plain gold band caught the ambient light of the chandelier, a stark contrast to the vintage Patek Philippe currently glittering on his wife's wrist across the room. It was heavy, this symbol of a vow he had kept with every fiber of his being, a vow she had treated as a mere networking opportunity. Slowly, deliberately, Daniel reached across with his right hand. He didn't rush. He didn't want the interns to notice the quiet demolition happening inches away. He gripped the edge of the ring, feeling the familiar, smooth metal bite into his skin one last time, and pulled. It slid off easier than he expected. He placed the ring exactly in the center of his empty dessert plate. The gold clinked softly against the fine china, a microscopic sound swallowed instantly by the surrounding corporate chatter. It sat there, a tiny, discarded prop on the stage of Evelyn's grandest performance. Daniel stood up. His movements were precise, devoid of the frantic energy that had possessed him earlier in the hallway. He smoothed his tailored jacket, the one she had chosen for him because it projected the right image, and looked toward the head table one final time. Evelyn was laughing, her head thrown back in genuine amusement at something Chad had whispered. She was radiant, untouchable, entirely consumed by the world she had ruthlessly conquered. She didn't look his way. She didn't feel the absence of his gaze. She didn't feel the tether snap. He didn't need to confront her. The room key, the note, the vintage watch, they were the screaming, undeniable truth. Any words he offered now would only be weaponized against him, twisted into the narrative of a jealous, inadequate man unable to handle a powerful woman. He would not give her that final satisfaction. He would not be the footnote in her success story. Daniel turned his back on the sapphire lounge, the glittering chandeliers, and the 7 years of meticulously constructed lies. He walked past the maitre d', who offered a confused, polite nod, and stepped out into the cool, chaotic air of the Manhattan night. The city roared around him, indifferent to the quiet apocalypse of his marriage. He pulled out his phone, the screen illuminating his face in the darkness. He opened the shared calendar app, his thumb hovering over the glaring event. * weekend retreat, the Meridian. * with a single swipe, he deleted it. Then, he deleted her contact, erased the shared photo albums, and severed the digital ties that bound him to Evelyn Brooks. He stopped at the curb, raising a hand to hail a yellow cab cutting through the neon-lit traffic. As the car pulled up, he took one last look back at the towering glass facade of the building where his life had been a carefully managed PR strategy. The air felt lighter, sharper, carrying the scent of rain and asphalt instead of expensive perfume and betrayal. He opened the cab door, sliding into the worn leather seat. The driver glanced at him through the rearview mirror. "Where to, buddy?" Daniel looked out the window as the cab pulled away from the curb, leaving the Sapphire Lounge and the ghost of his marriage far behind. He didn't know the exact destination, but he knew the journey had finally begun. He leaned back, the silence of the cab finally his own. "Anywhere," Daniel whispered softly into the darkness. "Our contract is officially expired, Evelyn."